Hello, everyone. We're going to be talking about plot this week because in order to write your assignment for this Sunday, it's important to understand what plot is and what are the different components of plot in order to write an effective story. So let's get right into it. All right, so the first part about plot that we're going to be talking about is something called exposition. So exposition basically is where you, as the author, are sort of setting the table for everyone. You're telling us about the relationships between characters and how they connect to the setting. What is the setting? Are we in a far off world? Are we in the future? Are we in the present time, and where does this person live in this time? Who are they friends with? What job do they have? All these sorts of things. And this is where we just really kind of get to know the world. It's sort of where the author's world building. And so in terms of the type of story you have, this might be relatively long, longer. If you're reading a book like Lord of the Rings or something like this, or if you're reading a short story, it might be relatively quick. And so it really depends on the needs of the story and how much information you need to give to the reader so they kind of understand what's going on, right? The next part of the plot is something called rising action. And we're going to talk about conflict later on in this class. But when we do, I want you to think back to rising action because the two, I think, are really important in order to understand each other. So, for example, in rising action, this is where the conflict starts to really take shape and kind of go off. In a way, you can kind of think of this as a roller coaster, we start on the roller coaster, we get going, and then the rising action is that part where you're going up and up and up and up, right? And this is where the conflict can really be seen to get going, right? And so at this point, we know what the conflict is and who it's between, and that it's incrementally just getting more and more and more tense, right? And so you can think of a story like Little Red Riding Hood. As soon as the reader understands kind of like what's going on, who this person is, what she's doing, that's when the rising action starts to happen. And so basically, as soon as she sets off all the way until her confrontation with the big bad wolf, we would call this the rising action. By the way, not each one of these is going to be the same length. They're not sort of, I know this is often looked at as a pyramid, but rising action is going to be the bulk of a story. Climax, of course, is where everything comes to a head, right? And so you can even think about this in terms of conflict, and it's where that central conflict, it's like it has to be resolved, right? Because there's going to be that moment, perhaps, that sort of where things come to a head, and there's going to be maybe two options, right? Like for someone like Little Red Riding Hood, either she's going to be eaten, and that resolves the conflict that way, or perhaps she figures out a way to escape, or she's saved, depending upon what version maybe you're reading. But at the end of the day, it's like we see that conflict that's been sort of ratcheted up over time coming to a head, right? And this is what's called the climax, right? Where everything's coming to a head, and that conflict is going to be resolved one way or the other. Now, the next part is something called falling action. And the last two parts, falling action and denouement, I think are kind of hard to distinguish between one another. If we go back to something like exposition, I think it's pretty clear to identify that part of a story. It's where the author is kind of building the world and telling us background information that we need to know about the world. And then we can see when the rising action starts to happen because we see, some quest is initiated or some conflict is, set up, right? But with falling action in the last part, which is called denouement, the two kind of seem a little confused or blended together. So if we think about the falling action, I would just think about it as the part of the story after the climax where the character, the hero, is trying to, gain some sense of equilibrium, whether by kind of trying to return things back to normal or maybe trying to create something new. This is different than the denouement, which in French means unraveling. This is basically where things are tied up and, like a bow is placed on the story. Now, I wouldn't be a good Star Wars fan without giving you an example of Star Wars on the first week, right? So I'm going to show you what I consider the denouement of The Empire Strikes Back and hope that Lucasfilms doesn't take it down, okay? All right, so I'm going to click on over. All right, so here, spoiler alert, this movie is quite old, so I'm assuming that everyone's seen it who's wanted to see it. But this is, the very, very, very end. And let's just watch it and I'll talk about why I think it's the denouement of the story where everything is kind of being wrapped up. All right. I'm sorry I cut off there. I know the music swells for a little bit longer, but we have things to do. So why is this wrapping things up, tying things in a nice little bow? Well, as you can see there, the Millennium Falcon just took off, and we know Chewie and Lando, Lon, now I'm getting his name confused. Let's say Chewie. They're taking off basically to go on their mission to save Han Solo from the clutches of Jabba the Hutt and the fearsome bounty hunter Boba Fett, right? Luke and Leia here, though, you can see them, well, at least Luke kind of with his arm around her, embracing her, embracing the light side, because as we saw in the climax, he made sure to turn away from the dark side. And so far too is jumping down the trash chute or whatever to escape the dark side. And now we see him embracing, his sister. Well, he doesn't. That's kind of we don't know this yet, right? But we see him embracing her, the embodiment maybe of the light side, and he's sort of made the choice, looking out, sort of kind of hopeful even, right? And so as much as people think this story, this entry into the Star Wars canon is such a downer, I kind of look at this moment and see, the characters looking out and kind of looking out with in terms of like there's hope, right? And not one of despair. And so I think that's, trying to kind of reconcile, put a bow on things, tie things up, and that we know, okay, he's Han's going to be saved. Luke, now he's whole again. He has a prosthetic arm, but he's whole again. And we know that he's made this decision in order to kind of remain on the good light path. So I think that to me, that would be an example of the denouement. It's a really short scene, maybe less than a minute, but in it, we get everything we need to know in terms of, kind of wrapping things up, putting a bow on it. All right. So if you liked that, me kind of bringing in some pop culture examples to explain it, I will be more than happy to do so. You just got to let me know via email or on the discussion boards or something, or even ask the instructor area, and I will be more than happy to include those in future posts. All right, so I think we should wrap up here. Once again, plot is the term that we're going to be focusing on this week, and I think it's going to be a really helpful one, and understanding the components of it so that you can write the most effective story in this week one assignment. Thank you, everyone. I'll talk to you on the discussion boards this week.